Hi, my name is Matthew Farber. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to be speaking about Gaming SEL, games, and social and emotional learning. Right in front of us, we have an image from a wonderful video game called Spiritfarer. And one of the mechanics in the game, one of the actions you can do, is to hug other characters, especially when they are feeling down and sad and really need that sense of virtual connection. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Northern Colorado here in the US. This Colorado is in my Zoom background here. My contact information is right there, matthewfarber.com, as well as a new book I have, which is linked there from Peter Lang Publishing, as well as other materials that I will be sharing today. My area of expertise, as well as this book, investigates the rich opportunities that games have in supporting social and emotional skill development. Research led me to experts throughout the world, actually, as well as designers and creators of games for children of all ages. Some of my work includes collaborations extensively with UNESCO MGIEP, which is the Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development. This is a Category 1 research institute, which is headquartered in New Delhi, India. I contributed to several chapters and papers on empathy and video games, as well as here a chapter on digital pedagogies and digital tools that can support social and emotional learning. This publication can be downloaded for free at the link above. UNESCO has its own social and emotional learning framework, one that is rooted in ideas around compassion, empathy, mindfulness, and critical inquiry. Because without critical thinking, knowing ethics, what is right, what is wrong, what good is having empathy? You could have empathy for a villain, for instance. So this is their EMC squared framework. Again, it's empathy, mindfulness, compassion, and critical inquiry. There are actually over 140 different frameworks of social emotional learning. The most common in the United States, where I'm calling from or presenting from, is from CASEL, which is the Collaborative of Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. There is what we call competencies, which is in the center here, self-awareness, which includes emotional awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, which is that critical thinking, ethical decision-making component, relationship skills, which is also, one of the 21st century skills of collaborating, working together to goal set and solve problems together, and social awareness. These competencies should be reinforced in the classroom, but also at school, at home, and in communities that children interact in, because these are the nested environments where children develop. So this is the framework from CASEL. But again, Britain has their own, UNESCO has their own. There are over 100 different frameworks of social emotional learning. I don't like to get tied up into which is the best framework. I think frameworks are actually kind of new, right? But the competencies are not. Empathy, perspective taking, teamwork, goal setting, though ethical decision making, right? Those are human skills. And what we find is that neuroscience is showing how these are actually teachable skills, that the brain actually will adapt. And the brain, particularly with early childhood and in adolescence, can be taught these skills. And emerging neuroscience is also suggesting that video games, because they're driven by player actions, because they're active experiential spaces of learning, those can be harnessed, some video games, to build these sorts of skills. Okay, so I think one of the more interesting video games to come along is Gree, a game developed in Spain. And Gree is a game that embodies emotions through metaphor. It's actually a game that was painted in watercolor, and in the game, it's mapped to the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Gree maps to CASEL, or social emotional learning competencies, um, like self-awareness. It can mentally help folks prepare for what experience of grief will be, because at some point in all of our lives, whether it is the loss of a dear pet, whether it is a family member or friend, whether it is somebody you've connected with who is famous, you may experience waves of grief. And in this game, uh, it is a metaphor. So by color, but also waves. So I'm going to play the trailer for this. It's all visual. There's no language at all, actually. It's told through the mechanics of visuals and games, as well as sounds. Um, and the waves are red, actually. And that represents waves of sadness. And the only way to pass through to acceptance is to hunker down. So Gree is also the name of the character, and she hunkers down in her dress to block the waves so she's not pushed backwards into perhaps depression or anger and denial. And the only way to reach acceptance, just like actual grief, is to push forward, to keep moving. Gree is playable on mobile devices, and it can be paired with books, which I will also explain in subsequent slides. There is on UNESCO MGIEP's website, they have something called Framer Space, Framer Space, and it's a platform which you can get to by the link in the earlier slide, where there are lessons and online modules about the game Gree. There are also lessons here around Bury Me, My Love, which is part of a research study that I was underwent with folks at UNESCO MGIEP. Bury Me, My Love is a game about the Syrian refugee crisis. And in this game, it plays on a phone, like a chat app, like on WhatsApp, for instance. And you play as one character who is separated from their partner. And it's a husband and wife. And it plays in real time. So you just read the chat messages and then you make decisions about how to reply. But let's say your spouse is stopped at the border, then you may have to wait, sometimes hours, to find out what the result was. This game also, we created curriculum around at UNESCO, and we piloted the study here in Colorado. Then we also did a study in New Delhi, India, and in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. And we found that players' compassion increased. And we think that is because in games you take actions. In games, you're not passive. It's not like watching a movie or a documentary about the Syrian refugee crisis or about death and grief, but you are actually taking part in the experience. You're active. Not all games are sad, of course. There's Minecraft, right? So Minecraft, one of the biggest games in the world, if not the biggest, has resources also on social emotional learning. Wonderful resources. They also have online courses on social emotional learning. And in my book, I cover the Mindful Night, which is a map where it's a series of mindfulness exercises where you practice guided breathing and you also look at the environment, which is surreal and beautiful, and you journal and take notes actually as you play. What games also do really well is they harness a basic human need of self-determination theory. In games, it may provide this need where children may not get this at school, or adults may not have this at work or at home. A feeling of competence, a feeling that you are actually in control of what is happening, a feeling of autonomy, that you have agency, you have control over actions, and then a feeling of relatedness, that you are connecting with others. This could be in a multiplayer video game like Minecraft, or it could be in a single player video game where you talk about the experience online after you play the game. To some people, it may seem like video games are a lonely experience, but most have argued they're not, and that's in a lot of research literature. I like to think of it like watching football, or in America, we call it soccer. So when we watch football, you could spend 8 hours watching a football game or dressing up in your in a jersey, in a uniform, and going to a game. And I don't know that that's much different than playing a video game for a couple of hours. We could watch TV for 2 hours, and that's socially acceptable. Playing a video game for 2 hours somehow is not quite as socially acceptable yet. And there's no real reason for that. It's maybe because it's a newer form of media, and it's an important form of media because this is where a lot of folks get their basic needs of self-determination theory. UNESCO has a higher goal for social emotional learning. It's called human flourishing. And the designers of the framework for self-determination theory look at human flourishing. If everybody has these needs met, whether it's at work, home, or augmented with games, or all games. It doesn't have to be a video game. We could be playing soccer or football together with our friends and meet self-determination theory. We will have a sense of human flourishing. That's the lofty goal. Games also provide growth mindset. That means we don't just fail and give up. We know that we have just not quite yet achieved that goal. That is growth mindset. There's a failure paradox in games from Jesper Juul, a games researcher in Copenhagen in Denmark. He came up with these steps. We, as humans, generally avoid failure. We hate failing at things. I hate it. But we experience failure when we play games, all games, board games, sports, and video games. Yet somehow, even though we know that, we still want to play lots of games. That's the paradox of failure. That is because games are safe from real world consequences. What happens in a game if you lose in football, if you die in a video game? It's not real, right? And that is why games are amazing practice spaces at social and emotional learning skills. Because if you make a wrong ethical decision, you could just remake that decision. There's no actual real world consequence. So this is a popular game with children, Super Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And I liken this to really good teaching. So in the game, there are these question marks on blocks, and they're never random. If you hit the question mark block and you are really doing bad in the race, you're in like 10th or 11th place, you will all of a sudden become a bullet or a star and be in 3rd place or 4th place. So you have a regained sense of competence. If you are in last place, that is really great to push you ahead. If you're in 1st place, you might get a coin or a banana, which is useless. So what the game does is it levels the playing field. So you always feel like you are competent, you're autonomous, and you have a feeling that you can relate to other players because this is a multiplayer game. Kids play this together with their friends. So I'm going to return to a simpler time, before video games. This is a game that's in almost every American household called Candyland. It's really similar to Snakes and Ladders, where it's a track game. So you pull cards, the cards match different colors, like a red card or a blue card, and then you go to that different spot. This is an image of an early version of the game from the 1940s. And it is a fun game for young children. Um, it teaches social emotional learning skills like turn taking, self-regulation, impulsivity control, and goal setting. Because there is no written text, parents aren't necessary. Kids can play by themselves. Sometimes they tell stories while they play. But as it happened, the game was not designed to be a social emotional learning experience. It was prototyped in 1949 on paper by a retired school teacher, Eleanor Abbott, because she was in the hospital recovering from polio. At the time, polio was an incurable and highly infectious disease that threatened paralysis to anyone who caught it. Children, here is an image of some children that were remote learning from radio instruction during a 1937 polio epidemic. Signs like we just have been experiencing lately with the COVID-19 pandemic are similar to what we saw during polio. Socially and physically distance from others, wash hands. This image is from the 1950s, 1953. You will see on the original board of Candyland, highlighted there, that line represents braces that were common on children who survived polio but had some paralysis in their leg. Fast forward to 2020, playgrounds were closed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Just like polio affected children to stay away from other children, Candyland was created to engender a sense of freedom and play when you couldn't play with others in person. The World Health Organization, the WHO, with video game publishers, launched the Play Apart Together campaign in 2020 to encourage children to socially distance or physically distance, but play together while they're apart. In March of 2020, Animal Crossing New Horizon was published by Nintendo, one of the best video games sold of that year. And in this game, you do play together with others on individual islands. I will play the trailer.
Welcome to your deserted island, where it's not so empty anymore. Thanks to all these interesting new arrivals. Might as well hang out or celebrate the good times. Because the more time you spend together, the more priceless memories you'll make. Explore, create, and customize your island paradise anytime. Animal Crossing New Horizons.
In the game, where my son actually talked to Santa Claus virtually and played with his friends, you could have all sorts of different events take place there. His birthday party was there. And there are also reactions that can be unlocked, which are these different emotions that you can express to other players, either virtual players or other real people that play this game together. It's a social life simulator. We play games together because they're the campfire of the 21st century. 65% of people who play video games in the United States play games with other people, whether it is on the same couch, whether it is online, or whether they talk about the game with other folks. There are all sorts of different types of video games on different themes. It's not like all movies are comic book movies and Avengers and Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. There are more to video games, I'd say, than Minecraft and other big budget games. There are lots and lots of smaller games, ones on themes of Alzheimer's and death and connectedness with others, and the ability to fail and recover. In our UNESCO guide, we provided some ways that teachers can bring games into the classroom. Many of the games that I've showed here, students can play for 10 minutes, like a virtual field trip. So if you're reading a book or novel in class and it deals with some of the themes of migration issues or death or connecting with others, what other, it could be about teamwork, right? In Minecraft, there's themes of teamwork. So they're all different types of social emotional learning, but students don't have to have their own computer and play for 5 hours. They can play together as a class, the same way you would put on a documentary film on a projector for 15, 20 minutes and then have a conversation around it. Games provide this, what we call an impossible field trip. So these are the steps. Think about your students. Keep them at the center always. Identify social and emotional learning goals and try to map them to what you're teaching. Brainstorm games that connect to those goals. Students will be able to collaborate together. Students will be able to compare and contrast the 5 themes of grief that people feel. And maybe they read a novel where a character experiences grief, but they also play the game Grieve for a little bit during class. And then sketch out these activities. Thank you very much. Again, my contact information and book are there. Feel free to reach out to me again at matthewfarber.com. Thank you so much for this opportunity.